Hi. Continuing on this unique journey of discovery, of adaptation, consolation, encouragement, support, reassurance, and hopefully relief, and even some guidance. As we have started to see in the last couple of weeks, this part of our journey is becoming a time of transition, fueled by our hopes and impatience, as much as by the increasing numbers of people who are becoming vaccinated. I have been noticing, especially in this last week, how many articles, essays, postings there are that speak to the uncertainty of this time and the surprise with which various writers are encountering such feelings. We all imagined that as soon as the vaccine became widely available, we would jump back into life as we once knew it, just over a year ago. No one could have predicted the hesitation, the anxiety, the fear and discomfort in the anticipation of resuming something like a normal life. Initially, we could not have predicted either that the real new normal would be this time of return to a new reality forged in the pressure cooker of pandemic life. Perhaps more than the surprise and hesitancy of it, I am finding most compelling many of the attempts to come to terms with this experience, to make sense of it, to quantify and qualify it, and to somehow predict its ongoing effect on us. One of these efforts that caught my eye this week, and that you may have also seen, was David Brooks's column in the New York Times last Friday entitled, "The Pandemic Can Alter Your Personality." Before I share some of what he wrote, let us pause for a moment to breathe. I was also reading this week an interpretation of the Exodus that included scholar Aviva Gottlieb Zornberg's observation that to hear is to open oneself up to vulnerability, change, contingency. As we leave behind what we've known, we need to have the courage to hear, to be vulnerable, in order to open ourselves to the many changes that might come in the months ahead. When Moses was called to lead the Israelites out of Egypt, he was worried that they wouldn't hear him. And in fact, they didn't. The text says, "Velo sham'u," they didn't listen. Why? The text says, "Mikotzer ruach," a phrase that can be translated in a variety of ways, but most often with the sense that they suffered from an insufficiency of spirit, or more relevant to our current purpose, shortness of breath. Rabbi Margie Jacobs comments, "As a teacher of mindfulness meditation, I know that the actual quality of my breath both reflects and informs my capacity to hear, to take something new into my awareness, particularly something challenging or uncomfortable. When I'm anxious or startled, my breath will shorten. If I sit for a few moments, focusing on my breath, allowing it to soften and lengthen on its own, I am then often more able to take in, to hear whatever was distressing me." So let us investigate, let us explore this idea as we take in our first full, deep, settling breath. Take it in deep, take it in full. Allow it to fill us. And even to hold it. I know that always makes me feel so good, just to hold on to it for a few seconds. And then to let it out. Slowly if we choose, or quickly, And on the second breath, I think we already noticed that we're beginning to settle. We might savor the exhale. I think we sometimes are rushing to get to that meditation. We rush in, sit down, I forgot to even do all of that. I was still in a rush mode to take our places, to sit comfortably but attentively, to let go of our bodies, to let go of our hands and just let them rest, to let go of our necks and our shoulders, our jaws, our feet, as we just plant them firmly on the ground. And take that breath. And in this way, we investigate the quality of our own breath and how it might relate to our ability to hear, to take in what is true in our own hearts and in our direct sensory experience. I think with the increasing fullness and settledness, we simultaneously let go of layers of tension, layers of that holding on almost for dear life. And when we do that, I believe we become more open, more available, more responsive to hearing, to feeling, to processing. And to doing it without preconceptions. So often we come at something with that built-in tension. Perhaps if we could just stop for a moment, take a deep breath, and hear the information or absorb the information from a more expansive place. It will change our entire reaction to it. Let us feel those good breaths. And keep in mind how when we explore the quality of what is coming in and out of our body so naturally, we allow it to take its own rhythm, to find its own way, and to take us with it. Let us take another couple of breaths before we continue. We return to David Brooks, who wrote in part, I don't know about you, But I've found the latest stage of the pandemic hard in its own distinct way. The cumulative effect of a year of repetition, isolation, and stress has induced a lassitude, a settling into the familiar with feelings of vulnerability. The shock of a year ago has been replaced by a sluggish, just getting to the end. I've got the same scattered memory issues many others in this Groundhog Day life describe. Walking into a room and wondering why I went there. Spending impressive amounts of time looking for my earbuds. Forgetting the names of people and places outside my COVID bubble. My extroversion muscles have atrophied while my introversion muscles are bulging. If you tracked me on a personality chart, I suppose liveliness would be down and reserved would be up. Carefree, down, and anxious, up. Which gets me wondering how a year plus of social distancing has changed our personalities. The good news is that personality traits are pretty stable. They change, but gradually over decades. In normal times, they generally change for the better. Research shows that most people get more calm, self-confident, and socially sensitive as they mature. But we are molded by our experiences, and it would be shocking if an experience this jarring didn't mold us in some important way. There are all the concerts we didn't go to, the plays and dinner parties we didn't enjoy. Few of us got to experience the delight of finding ourselves in a social set we knew nothing about. This is a loss of emotional nutrition. It manifests socially as loneliness. 36% of Americans, including 61% of young adults, report serious loneliness, according to a survey by the Making Caring Common Project at Harvard. I've been surprised by how much it feels like not just a social problem, but a moral one. We say we feel a sense of purpose and mission when we are serving a cause larger than ourselves. But I've learned this year how much having a feeling of purpose depends on the small acts of hospitality we give and receive each day, sometimes with people we don't know all that well. These opportunities have been diminished, and my work has expanded to fill the hours. I've unwittingly asked work to provide things it is incapable of supplying. We have all done that with all kinds of things: work, television, podcasts, streaming, cooking, food. Those opportunities have been diminished, and my work, this year should have been the ideal opportunity to take a step back and self-reflect. I know a lot of people who've done important inner work this year and a lot who were just too exhausted. I've found it hard recently to plan for the future because from the continent of lockdown, I've found it hard to imagine what life will be like when this is over and we live in the continent of freedom. Pandemic year feels like a parenthesis in our life narratives. How will we, those of us whose losses have been comparatively small, how will we think about this experience 5 years from now? As a gift, an anguish, or perhaps just a void. I'm trying to describe a year in which we've all been physically hunkered down, but socially and morally less connected. This has induced, at least in me, a greater fragility but also a great sense of flexibility and a greater potential for change. I've found I've burned out on my screens, burned out about the politicization of everything, and have rediscovered my love for the New York Mets. People who have endured an era of vulnerability emerge with great strength. I'm also convinced that the second half of this year is going to be more fantastic than we can imagine right now. We are going to become hyper appreciators, savoring every small pleasure, living in 1,000 delicious moments, getting together with friends and strangers, and seeing them with the joy of new and grateful eyes. It's really quite fascinating, his reflections. So let us take a moment and breathe in these thoughts: the anticipation, the optimism, the recognition of our vulnerability, flexibility, resilience, and introspection. He presents to us as a complex human being, dealing with a complex situation and working his way through it with honesty, sensitivity, awareness, and even some compassion for himself. Let us breathe. Let us just return to the breath. And we might take some inventory. Did his remarks, did his thoughts make us feel at ease? Did they raise our anxiety level? And if feelings have arisen that are uncomfortable, let us just notice them. And we might let them go. And if we have taken in the optimism and anticipation that he writes about, perhaps we can stay with those feelings for a few moments, certainly for an inhale, for holding for a few seconds. And we don't have to let them go. When I paused for a moment, when he said, I wonder how we will look back on this time in 5 years. Did any of you fill in an answer? I was hoping you might. He suggested a gift, a void, an anguish. Some of us might find that it was a blessing, or parts of it were a blessing. Some of us could supply the word nightmare, although by this time I'm hopeful that what began as a time of great discomfort and dislocation and confusion and even depression has lifted somewhat as we have all accommodated its boundaries and its requirements. We cannot know how we will look back on it. And the way we look back on it in 5 years will be very different, I expect, from the way we look back on it after 6 months, or 2 years, or 4 years, or 10. Let us breathe in the reality that each of us has processed this time in our own individual ways. And we will process this time of transition, in our own individual ways. And if we can take a deep breath from time to time, that will help ease us, relieve us, relinquish our spirits. To greet whatever comes with our full selves, our open hearts and minds and spirits. There is one more teaching from this past week's observance of Pesach that I would share with you because I think it speaks to us beyond the observance of Passover as a life lesson and guide. Rabbi Dina Weiss writes, the Mishnah provides a basic framework for how to tell the Pesach story. We begin with degradation and end in praise. This is a helpful guideline for the telling of any story, as listeners like to hear a story of triumph and victory. The overcoming of adversity increases the dramatic tension. But at the Passover Seder, we aren't telling people stories that they don't know. There is no real element of surprise or of suspense. Even the children know in the end of the story, everything will turn out right. Why don't we just start the Seder with Hallel, praising God for our freedom? The requirement to tell the story in this manner, moving from the negative and going to the positive, serves another function. Telling the story from the difficult beginning accentuates the complexity of growth, healing, and leave their scars. The struggle is not forgotten, even once the victory has been obtained. The costs are real, and the trials at the outset are an inextricable part of the joyful conclusion. There is no freedom without the slavery that precedes it. The praise at the end of the story derives its reality and its relevance from our awareness of where the story begins. We need this rule to be in place when we tell our own stories, because it reminds us that everyone we encounter is carrying their past with them. Our rabbis teach in the Mishnah, just as there is exploitation in business transactions, there is exploitation in speech. If a person is a penitent, no one should say to him, remember your past deeds. If she is the child of converts, no one should say to her, remember the deeds of your ancestors. As it says, do not exploit a convert and do not suppress her. Telling our story with all of the difficult pieces intact, reminds us to be sensitive in this way. What we think of as old scars and topics that can be referenced lightly might still be felt as acute and festering wounds by the person who bears them. A person can be in a new stage of life, look and feel fine, and all it might take to bring them back to their most painful moment could be the offhand comment that we make to them. When we tell the story of our redemption from the beginning, incorporating the suffering into our narrative, we make the telling real. This process should increase our awareness of the pain that can endure beyond any happy ending. The story of our freedom includes the story of our shackles. Every year we repeat, Avadim Hayinu, we were slaves, because that slavery remains a part of us. The Haggadah reminds us of the ways in which our history still marks us, how everything we've endured still shapes us, our feelings, and our perceptions. We should use the awareness of our own painful moments to increase our sensitivity to the hidden pain of the people we encounter. It might also help us eventually to put into perspective the ongoing after effects of the pandemic experience. So let us breathe. Breathe in this moment, the awareness of all of the facets of our experience, all of the facets of this pandemic experience, all of the parts of us that we carry with us at every moment of our lives. Just as our breath comes in and goes out again, so we are always the sum total of our lives. We may forget for a while. We may not access certain memories, certain experiences, certain joys and certain traumas, but they are there. They are part of who we are. All of it. In this inhalation, this breath of life, so the details of life are in us and of us. By way of conclusion, and a benediction for the week ahead, I offer to you this poem, Sonnets to Orpheus, Part 2, 12. Want the change. Be inspired by the flame where everything shines as it disappears. The artist, when sketching, loves nothing so much as the curve of the body as it turns away. What locks itself in sameness has congealed. Is it safer to be gray and numb? What turns hard becomes rigid and is easily shattered. Pour yourself out like a fountain. Flow into the knowledge that what you are seeking finishes often at the start, and with ending begins. Every happiness is the child of a separation it did not think it could survive. And Daphne, becoming a laurel, dares you to become the wind. That is by Rainer Maria Rilke, the Austrian poet and writer. Every happiness is the child of a separation it did not think it could survive. And Daphne, becoming a laurel, dares you to become the wind. May these thoughts be the wind under your wings of the week ahead as we continue to experience together every moment of this world that continues to evolve with us, with our hearts and our spirits, open and available to its changes. Be well, be strong, be safe. God bless. I will see you next week.